Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi and welcome to Pivot on Hilal TV. Today with me a very special guest, a dynamic young woman, a woman who has contributed phenomenally to the way in which we see certain perspectives. And her name is Jo Bluen. She's an educator, a writer, and academic who has been working on issues of colonial genocide, apartheid, and international justice for many years. Jo has contributed tremendously in terms of the work that she has done with regards to Palestinian activism and the ways in which issues are understood from a very particular perspective, and that is with regards how Jewish people present their understanding of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Now, her research focuses on the intersections of apartheid and genocide and the connected oppressions and histories in international law and global politics. She's a member of South African Jews for a Free Palestine, and she has previously worked for the Institute of Justice and Reconciliation, the London School of Economics, and Business Day. So with that, I'd like to say good day, welcome. Thank you very much, Jo, for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me, and greetings to everyone at home. Hi.
So, Jo, tell us a little bit about yourself, so that the audience can get a better understanding of who exactly you are, besides this academic, intelligent person.
I am a South African. I'm from Johannesburg. I'm Jewish, as you've mentioned. I love to cook. And I am, deeply committed to social issues, and deeply grateful to be able to work with many people, including yourself, in thinking about how we imagine a world that's just a little bit better, and we imagine together towards freedom and an end to this kind of violence.
And you're also a cat lover, right?
And I'm a cat lover, and I'm a parent of 2 cats. And yeah, absolute cat lover, completely besotted, irrationally.
I've been reading a lot about cats recently, and I noticed that all the posts that are coming up indicate to how they actually help you in terms of depression, emotional instability, or even in terms of soothing one's personality when you're facing a very difficult and challenging day. So I think for those of us who love cats, we find tremendous love and satisfaction in just being around them. And that reminds me of all the images of the cats that you see coming out of Gaza. How did that affect you?
Oh, yeah, I think that was really, I think those images of people bringing their cats out, was really powerful, and the care. I think very often we live in a very anthropocentric world. We think a lot in terms of humans, and I think the way cats were caring for people and people were caring for cats was really, really deeply heartbreaking, and beautiful. Just the kind of test and affirmation of human kindness and care, even in the most devastating of fascist and oppressive circumstances.
So when you speak of this affirmation of human understanding and care, in difficult circumstances, much of the work that you are doing also centers around that affirmation of care in difficult circumstances. So as a South African, how have you placed your Jewish identity in this very, very fractured society, first globally and then on the local scale? Because, there is serious contradictions in terms of your identity and even in terms of my identity as a Muslim.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting question, and I'm so glad you raised it. And I think it's quite complicated. So I think the first thing I'd like to say is that my Jewish identity is a distinctly anti-Zionist Jewish identity, and a diasporic Jewish identity. And now, I think, as you know, the idea that Zionism is associated with Judaism is a really very recent phenomenon in the history of Judaism, and in the history of the world. So, we talk about, one of the Jewish principles we talk about is doikait, which means here-ness. And the idea of that is, you are, wherever you are is home, I guess, would be the kind of closest I can translate. And the idea of that is to say, we aren't attached to a nation state, where Jews have existed in many societies throughout history. Obviously, the Nazi Holocaust being kind of this awful testament to how many Jews there were in Europe, and how they were persecuted. So I think on the one hand, it's a very diasporic sensibility. On the other hand, it's a very consciousness of being diasporic, and both diasporic and also, I guess, a white settler within the South African context. And number three, and I think your point about our positionalities, is in contrast to how anti-Semitism has been framed by Zionists, as an attack on Israel. We know that actual anti-Semitism is a deeply troubling form of racism and discrimination, and is very deeply linked to Islamophobia as well, and anti-Blackness and other forms of oppression. So I think about my Jewishness in a deep and profound cultural way. I come from an Ashkenazi family, many of whom escaped the Nazi Holocaust and the pogroms, a deep sensibility around justice, but also profoundly a deep sensibility around our connected struggles and connected oppressions.
So what is interesting is that you speak of this connected struggles and connected oppressions, right? It's almost as if to say that we've been through something, we should be able to understand somebody else who's going through this. Yet the irony of it seems to be lost on the Zionists and the way in which they respond to the Palestinians and the way in which they treat the Palestinians. So where do you think this disjuncture came about, and how is it that those who were so badly treated, who suffered such an injustice in their past, are perpetuating the same injustice today, and worse, on a people whom they have occupied and basically stolen their land from?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think part of it has to do, because so the first thing I often say about this is that the Nazi Holocaust was not perpetuated against Israel. It was against European Jews. And European Jewish Holocaust survivors are actually very poorly treated in Israel as well. Obviously not as badly as Palestinians, but very, very poorly treated. And I think this is a really, it's very central to a kind of national mythos, this idea that we have been through that. And I think instead of saying never again for anyone, what has come out is a kind of a deep kind of lager mentality amongst Zionists, some of them Jewish, obviously a lot of Jewish Zionists, but also Christian Zionists, and a deep kind of mentality of saying, the idea of the Israeli state being some kind of guarantor against the future protection of Nazism. And with that, these really, really outlandish framings of Palestinian resistance along the lines that it is part of kind of Nazism, which obviously is ridiculous. And I think you're absolutely right. And I think the point is in that we learn from our teachings, we learn from our ancestral histories that when we fight for justice, we keep our eyes open to injustice against anyone. And so, what's happening in Palestine, what has been happening in Palestine since 1917, since 1948, and of course in the Gaza genocide now, and the continued attacks in the West Bank is really an abuse and a violation of Jewish faith rather than acting in its name. It's a use of theological tools to justify political violence.
So before we go to the break, we have only 2 minutes, and I think for the benefit of my audience, if you can perhaps just quickly clarify what is the difference between Judaism and Zionism, and are all Jews Zionists, all Zionists Jews?
Great question. Yeah, and really that is, such an important one. So Zionism and Judaism are not the same thing, and by the same token, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are not the same thing. Zionism is a support for the Israeli state, which, as we know, is an apartheid state currently committing genocide that has been occupying Palestine since 1948. Judaism is a faith much older than Zionism. Some people think of it as a race group. I mean, there's a lot of there's many different races of Jews, but let's not get into that. But I think the important thing is to draw a very, very clear distinction between Judaism and Zionism. We see a lot of Christian Zionists, first of all. Second of all, a lot of Jewish people who aren't Zionists. And really, I sort of think about it a lot when I think about my own family. There's this diasporic sense which says, we're not supposed to be sticking in one state. We're supposed to be, we've kind of integrated into societies. So a critique of the state of Israel is very, very different to a critique of Jewish people. And in the same way, support for the state of Israel is very different from the support of Jewish people. And in fact, Israel needs Zionism in order to sustain its state-centric existence.
Thanks for that, Jo. So we're going to a break, and when we come back, I'd like to pick up a little bit more about this in terms of your conscious reflections to these particular distinctions that brought about your unique personality and identity. But I'll see you after the break. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the second segment of Pivot Today on Hilal TV. With me, my very special guest, Jo Bluen, who is an activist for South African Jews for a Free Palestine. She's also an academic, and she has done extensive research on genocide. Prior to the break, we were speaking a little bit about the difference between Zionism and Judaism. And Jo, I just want to pick up a little bit, on that distinction, because I think there is a serious misunderstanding in many people who have not followed the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for a very long time, and it's not a conflict anymore. We know it's a belligerent occupation, but they tend to conflate everything in terms of Jewishness. So that's where the anti-Semitism comes in. So for people who have not really studied this or not paid attention to it, or intentionally made themselves ignorant about it, there is, after the genocide and what we see happening in Gaza at the moment and the brutal images that are coming out, it's almost natural to believe that many people who have a sense of humanity will begin to start to hate. And I've been reading a lot of hate rhetoric recently on social media where people are saying that for the first time in their lives, they're feeling a sense of hate. But this sense of hate is now directed towards Israelis. Do you believe that this sense of hate can then translate into a sense of hatred for Jews, for people who don't understand the difference between Zionism and Jews and Judaism?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important point. And it's, if we look at the efforts made by not just Israel, but a kind of an international establishment where we go back to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism, which really conflates anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, which was also recently adopted in the US as well. There has been an onslaught on meaning for a really, really long time, where there has been this push to say that any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. Now we do, and I do want to say this because I think that, there is a genuine anti-Semitism problem globally, the same way there's a genuine Islamophobia problem the same way there's a genuine anti-Blackness problem, and a lot of this, and I think one of the things, I think to emphasize your point, one of the things that I think is really interesting or terrifying is a lot of those who are virulently in support of the state of Israel are actually deeply anti-Semitic. So if you look, for example, at Christian Zionists in the States, there's a lot of support for Israel. There's a lot of support when Trump wanted to move the embassy to Jerusalem, but also aligned with that a deep anti-Semitism alongside Islamophobia in the context of the global war on terror, anti-Blackness, kind of white supremacy in general. So I think the point that you raise is really important, and I think that it's it's really scary. The work that the Israeli state is also doing to support this conflation. And the irony is that one of the points that is often made by Zionists or by Israel is that the existence of the Israeli state guarantees the kind of protection of the Jews. But in fact, it's making Jews more and more unsafe globally.
Now, when you were speaking, I just remembered something. There was... I don't know if it was Secretary Blinken or if it was Biden who said that Israel is the only safe place for Jews in the world today, which then made me sit back and think, oh my God, so if Jews can only be safe in Israel, then what does that say about the democracies of the Western world and everywhere else? Are Jews not meant to be safe in those places?
I think it's, this is exactly the point. If, are you actually saying, that you are not able to keep your citizens safe? Is that what you're saying by making this point, which is really, really a major statement to be saying? And I think it is part of the way in which diasporic Jews have been seen as a threat to Israeli society. And especially if you're looking at, you look at what's happening in the States at the moment with Jewish Voices for Peace. You look at what's happening here, for example, with, South African Jews for a Free Palestine and our comrades in the BDS coalition. We're all working together. And I think that is very threatening, to the Zionist establishment, is to see Jews saying, no, not in our name. No, absolutely not. We are both preserving the sanctity of our culture and our ancient teachings, and also standing up for justice, because that is how, that's what we believe. And I think if you kind of go back throughout history, I'm going big back, but like 1400s, where the figure of the Jew, is often used to kind of modulate other forms of racism, and specifically anti-Blackness and Islamophobia as well, and to kind of to produce this idea of the liminal figure that can move between whiteness and not whiteness, persecution and not persecution, is a project of white supremacy under colonial modernity to kind of exert control.
Now, these are fascinating points, and I'm going to come back to them. But I just want to pick up on your whole comment of the diasporic Jew. And that is, and it's true, that they are changing the face in which people are beginning to interact with the state of Israel and understanding what is happening in Israel. And so when you look at the protests that are coming out of America, for instance, in Berlin over the past few days, and where young Jewish people are standing in the streets, being arrested, protesting and pushing it back against the establishment, do you find that this is the new voice, the voice of the younger people, the diasporic Jews who know the difference between their religion and state terrorism? A state that is basically usurping their Jewish identity, usurping their tragic history to forge something far more evil.
Yeah, I think this is, I don't have the numbers. We've been focused on fighting the genocide with all we can do, and all we have. But I think the interesting point that you bring up about Germany is really, really, really fascinating, because, there's these, so they have these anti-Semitism commissioners. I'm not sure if you or your viewers are familiar with them. And these are these people that are kind of these strange authoritarian commissioners appointed by very undemocratic means to kind of look out for anti-Semitism.
And is this, sorry to interrupt, but is this being done by the state, by the German state?
It's being done. I mustn't get into specifics here, because I think it's different, but it is part of like a municipality type thing. I can come back to you on that.
Okay.
But they're this. So we do need to look out for anti-Semitism, because generally people who are actually genuinely anti-Semitic, by which I mean, I'm not talking about anti-Semitic as in anti-Israel. I'm talking about anti-Semitic as in anti-Semitic, is important. But these anti-Semitism commissioners are actually obviously there to crack down on predominantly Muslim people in Germany, and to kind of crack down on criticism of Israel. You can't say stop the genocide. But one of the things that's very interesting and quite terrifying, if you think about this in historical perspective, is that most of the people that have been kind of, I don't know if they're arrested or kind of sanctioned by these anti-Semitism commissioners, have been leftist Jews. So you have German Christians arresting or sanctioning left-wing anti-Zionist Jews for anti-Semitism. And that took me a while to wrap my head around in the context of history. And I think one of the things we're seeing, and I think the German example is really interesting, is the failure of the denazification process in Germany, and the ways in which that is now playing out on, to some extent, anti-Zionist Jews and also Muslims and immigrants and Black people, and it's really, really quite a kind of failed denazification that has transpired into a strange idea that supporting Israel is not supporting a regime that is racist and an apartheid regime, but also deeply anti-Semitic in many ways.
So we're at the end of this particular segment, at the end of our first broadcast with you. We're going to come back for a second one, but I want to close this segment touching back on you now, on Jo. This young activist, do you find that, your conscious reflection is something that has brought you to this level of activism? Because I have noticed now that there's a lot of young Jewish people coming out who are saying that we were Zionists. We grew up with the Zionist understanding, indoctrination, and after learning, consciously reflecting and asking questions, we are now anti-Zionist. Did the same thing happen to you?
It's a great question. I think I was very lucky to be brought up in a context where I was always encouraged to ask questions, where I was encouraged to stand up for what is right and what is good and what is just. I don't know if that translates to, so I was able to kind of have a space for curiosity outside of, one of the kind of, the Zionist indoctrination of the Jewish day schools, for example. And I think it's a kind of, it's such a difficult question. I'm always a bit awkward talking about myself. But one of my first memories, I think about memory a lot. One of my first memories was 1994. And the 27th of April. And I remember, and memory is interesting because you kind of go backwards and forwards. And I remember, being on Louis Botha Avenue in Johannesburg and right by Balfour Park. And when I think back on that, I think about this moment of the end of apartheid that was so formative for me. And and it's by Balfour Park Shopping Centre, which is, I'm thinking about the Balfour Declaration and the centrality of Jan Smuts to that. So I guess on the one hand, I think I've come to my interest in my activism and my commitment and my research on the one hand because I'm a white Jewish descendant of Eastern European Holocaust escapees and pogrom escapees, and on the one hand, that's a recipient of the kind of largest justice mechanism in the world, and on the other hand, you look at the South African example where, as a white South African, there's been in many ways an incoherent justice. I think of these two.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to have to stop you. I'm going to have to stop you there because we're way over time. But we can pick up on the sentiment in the next segment. So thank you for sharing these thoughts with me for this time. I'm coming back to you, and we're going to pick up our discussion a little further. So till we see you next week. Fi amanillah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.